Hello guys, welcome to the second part of Catalan for white. So now in this part we'll basically see the both most popular and probably the best moves for black. Of course together with d takes c4. So we'll see the moves bishop b4, which is very popular, and bishop b7, which is the classical way to play, and the most solid one. So in the first part of this course, we'll start with the move bishop b4, and now of course white has some options like knight bd2 or knight c3, but I think the main move and probably still the best is the move bishop d2. Of course knight c3 or knight bd2 are also interesting, but here we'll just consider this move. So after bishop d2, black has many options. Of course the main move is bishop e7. There are many games, thousands of games, and there's some other rare options like bishop d6, not so bad, a5. Recently it became very popular, and also there's some other rare moves. Actually in this particular lesson we're gonna see the rare moves for black, which are bishop takes d2 and some other options like knight c6, c5 and queen e7, which are not very popular, but they're also kind of playable, and we need to know how to play against them. So let's start with the move knight c6, which is really rare and looks also not so great, because after we take on b4 he must take. Now the knight is kind of losing tempies. We can simply play a3 at some point. I think now we have many reasonable options. We can go queen a4 first and just develop. We can go also a3 and just develop the knight. It looks good, but we can play simply the most normal way, just to play bishop g2, and I don't see anything wrong about it. Castle a5 doesn't change much. Castle a3. We just want to develop our pieces. The knight here. We can push e4 eventually. This knight doesn't belong to c6 simply. And after bishop g2 castle, we can do the same. We can go here, b6, castle. We just develop normally. Eventually some queen c2 and some e4 can come, or even queen c2, some knight e5, depends what black is playing. The knight doesn't belong to c6, so he will need to go some knight e7, but his position is already very passive. Even we can think about c5 in some situations. So this knight c6 looks very passive and not really so interesting for black. So here after bishop d2, there's some other options. c5, for example. It's a bit rare move, but it's kind of possible. We saw something similar in the previous, in the first part of this course, and we saw something similar. Take bishop knight d2. For example, if you go bishop g2, this transposes to something that we saw in the previous part, which actually transposes to the line with d takes c4. Here c5, and now white takes and plays knight e5. But compared to that line, of course, here after c5 we can simply take and play knight e2, just even protect this pawn, and this is just better version for white. Knight c6, I think this is similar, probably after knight c6 we transpose. If he goes with dc4 immediately and with idea b5, to use that this bishop is still not here and he wants to play bishop b7 himself. But the whole problem is, of course, that here we can simply go knight e5. Here doesn't change much. I think white is just slightly better thanks to our structure, and these pawns are kind of weak. And not that only white is slightly better, but also it's very easy game for white and very pleasant one. We can simply continue here. Now the most logical to me is knight d3, to attack the pawn, to control the square, maybe to develop the queen like this, and white is a bit better simply with thanks to this pawn, which can be passed pawn in the future. But of course here we have some other options. We can even go queen d3, and even these exchanges, it doesn't help black because we're controlling kind of the c file. The queen can come here maybe, and the position is still very unpleasant, simply because we have sort of pawn up, because these pawns are doubled. So this is about dc4. Let's say knight c6, we just go here, we castle. Now we just develop our pieces normally. We go here. Now we have many options. We can first take, we can go queen here maybe. We can just play 3 solid. Eventually we can take here some knight e5 or queen e4. It's still this structure where black is just double pawns, and I think it's quite easy for white to play here and very passive for black. So basically this is about about bishop d2, c5. So now we are moving to the move queen e7, which is kind of close to, I think, Bogolubov system, which arises here after bishop b4. Sorry, bishop b4, of course, bishop d2, queen e7. And now after g3, normally black is not playing d5, black is just somehow playing knight c6, taking, then d6 and d5. So here already he committed to d5, and it's a little bit different, but it's kind of possible. I think it's not so bad for black. Bishop here. It makes sense maybe to go queen a4, but actually I prefer to go bishop g2, because here I think black is more or less equalizing after knight c6 take. It looks good for white, but black has very nice plan. For example, if he goes c5 immediately, I think we can keep advantage by taking and very importantly exchange the queens. This is very important move. The point is that now we are keeping our king still here, and we can eventually even go long castle with some ideas like knight c5, some knight d6, e4, f4 maybe. I think it looks a little bit unpleasant for black. But in this situation, after bishop g2, he can even go rook d8 first. Now he can take. Now we must protect this pawn. We must go e3 and a6 with the idea b5. Basically provoking that we take with the queen, because if we take with the knight, we're losing some material. So we need to take with the queen, and he goes here. And now black is more or less equalizing. It's still, of course, a little bit better, even this position. But black is very solid, and it's very difficult for white to break through. Although we can play something like h3, rook d1, b4. Still, of course, we can continue. White is a bit more pleasant. But instead of queen a4 already, I think it's a good idea just to develop our pieces, and there's no need to go queen a4, because anyway we're just helping him by this knight c6 and then playing for e5. So now, for example, this is simply a mistake, because we are just winning some material because of all the pins, and white is just crashing here. If he goes knight e4, it's very dubious. He's losing 10 pieces, but to take our bishop, but this is not so bad for us. Let's say even here, e4, queen c2, this is just big advantage already. Some rook d1, rook e1. It looks very unpleasant, especially with this bishop on c8. So knight e4 is just losing 10 pieces, important 10 pieces. He needs to make castle. He needs to develop. And after he develops, we also develop. And this is sort of critical position, the critical position after queen e7 line. So black has some options. But his main problem is that this bishop is very passive. And our game is sort of easy. We can just play 3, some knight takes d2. It looks kind of very good Catalan pawn structure. So for example, this is not a good idea, because we can even escape now with the bishop with some threats like c5 and a3. And this is very, sorry, this is very dangerous for black. If h6, I think we are just winning already some pawn. He must go a4, and we can just go a3, queen a4. So after bishop g5, if he takes, we go e4. This looks terrible. I continued a little bit, but maybe there are some other alternatives here. Now this looks very tempting, but after taking at e5, maybe it's not so clear. The best objectively move is the intermediate a3. The idea is if he takes, even this position is just very bad, 95 take. We are pawn down, but the king is very weak. Some queen here, some knights, even maybe rook a3, rook f3. It looks already nearly winning. It looks very, very, very bad for black, because the king is very weak. And after a3, if he goes back here, then now we can take with the bishop. This is still not so clear. Some attack, and still very dubious for black, but I believe bishop g5 is just better. And we just want to recapture the piece, and we continue this position. Black's king is extremely bad, some rook e1. It's still not over, but it looks already very, very bad. So a5, this is the problem, bishop g5. c5, it's similar to the previous lines that we saw. It's this structure where white is just slightly better. We continue by rook c1, e3, and so on. If he goes something like bishop d2, it looks like transposing to something that we'll see a little bit later. If he goes c6, we just go queen c2, and it's not clear why the bishop is here, the queen is there. It's sooner or later he needs to take, and we take with the knight, which helps us to push e4. So this e4 is sort of the main move, I believe, but still white is just slightly better. even more already potentially. Knight c6, trying to push e5. If he goes rook d8, we just take. And this is the game Nihao Sarana played in online chess.com 2020. The position is terrible because the bishop is so passive. So now there are many options like rook d1 simply, or e4, or even knight e5 and something like this. He never can take because we take and then knight e4 and we will have this square, very nice for us, our knight. So white is clearly better. So basically after queen c2 maybe he needs to go here, take bishop back, trying to push e5 here. I think white is already very pleasant, has very pleasant position. After e5 we can even go bishop g5 or some other options, but it looks like slightly better and without much risk. So this is about queen e7, it's simply very passive, it's not so bad, but it's very passive. So now we're moving to the rare option bishop d2. Actually there are many games here, but it looks a little bit better already. It's just very nice sort of Queen's Indian defense, because normally black should go at some point b6, bishop b7, otherwise it's very difficult to develop this bishop. So here let's say castle, bishop g2. Now he has many different options, but anyway he needs to go with b6 I think, or maybe knight d7 early, I think is similar. Let's say if he goes queen e7, castle. So now the queen on e7 is a bit strange. He needs to push c5 maybe, otherwise why he played queen e7. If he goes b6, it's possible, or rook d8. I don't like rook d8 much because rook c1 and the rook doesn't do much on d8. If he goes b6 now, then we go here. It's similar to what we're gonna see, but this queen why came to e7 is not so clear. So now we have some options. I like this plan with the idea to be ready for e4, but there are many other good moves. I think even this is not so bad. The idea is after c5, because he can't go knight d7 because of the c5 and you can just take on d5. So he needs to go c4, c5, we go here, attacking the pawn, threatening cd5, and now knight a5 as well. And this looks very nice. I don't think if it's so much, but it's very pleasant. We go rook d1, some b3, and these hanging pawns are just a little bit not so great here, so I think white is a bit better. But after bishop b7, I like the more concrete way to go rook e1. Rook e1 is always very useful. He can't go knight b7. If he put the knight on a6, then now we have some alternatives. We can go maybe this, and just playing this position is a bit better. Typical Queen's Indian, and white is a bit better. But actually with the exchanging of these bishops, the black square bishops, white is just slightly better always. But after knight a6 we have also this option to block these pieces, which looks very nice, very tempting. After take to go here. I think this is a bit worse version. Let's say he goes here to keep the rook close to the queen, but then we go even here, and this looks very unpleasant. We're controlling the squares, this knight is very bad, and it seems like this knight is just terrible. This pawn is hanging also. It's a very unpleasant position. And after rook e1, c5 looks very logical. Now we exchange, and this is the point of rook e1. Now we can go e4, very concrete. Take with the knight is better, with the pawn is worse because we take, and then eventually we recapture, and white is just clearly better. This pawn is also very weak. And after e4, if he takes on e4 with the knight, then we just play here. I think there are other options, but this is clearly the best. Queen f6, otherwise maybe f3 is coming, so he needs to move the queen somewhere. He has some other options, but they don't change much. Let's say we change everything. And this is also very unpleasant. I think the position is just very unpleasant. Some rook f4 is coming, some dc5, queen g4 or something. It looks very easy for white simply. So this is about this queen e7, castle b6. After queen e7, maybe c5 he can play, because that's why he played probably queen e7. But now he's losing some tempies anyway. We take, we go here. Maybe a3 with b4 is also slightly better, but this is easy. For example, this endgame already looks very bad because we are controlling the c file. The knight will come here. This bishop is very bad. Ours is very strong. It looks like fantastic Catalan endgame for white. And after queen b3, if he goes here, we simply develop. Now we take with the knight is even worse. because this is just, for example, this is very bad because knight c5 is coming. And after ABC, this also looks very bad. e4, then knight c4. This pawn is really a weakness. And after b5, we can even go here, threatening e4 and knight c5. Looks terrible for black. And if he takes with the pawn, we can just exchange, and this is clearly very pleasant for white. Just slightly better, but it's very pleasant. After something like this, you can even go knight f1, knight e3. Looks not so nice for black. It's just a torture, this endgame, to be honest. So this is about queen e7. So let's say bishop g2. Another option is knight d7 immediately, castle. So now b6 will transpose to the b6 line. c6 is too passive. This is my game against Demchenko, played in Jerusalem 2015. I believe it came from different move order, but anyway, after c6 we are reaching this position. And now I played queen c2, obviously, with the d4. Now black is just not on time to play b6, bishop b7 and c5. This is the usual plan in these positions. Now it just doesn't work because we are just 10 pieces up. And now he never can go c5, so we just go here, c5. And white was just crushing this position. I mean, it's just terrible position with this bishop on b7. And obviously this is a small trick which ends by queen b4 winning a piece. So c6 is not great. c5 is the other move, which is also not so great. Is another game of mine against Arkady Naidich. I didn't play so great this game and it ended in a draw, but white has very nice position. This c5 is the best. Maybe I can take also here. I think probably this was the game actually. Probably he should go e d5 and just play this position, which is slightly better for sure. In the game, black played knight d5, take. Now I didn't play very accurate. I played rook c1, a3, knight b3, and I got only slightly better position. But after knight c5, I think already e4 is very strong. According to the computer, white is clearly better because we simply want to place the rooks and black lacks development. I think our pieces are very active. The knight here, maybe e5 also sometime. So it looks very good. But after cd5 anyway, maybe he will take ed5. So I think the best is to take here and then b4. If knight back, then it's very passive. We simply developed everything. We just go rook d1 and this bishop is still here. If it was on b7, it's a different story, but now it's too late. If he goes knight e4, we just take. The endgame is just bad because this pawn will be lost. And if he takes with the knight, we have a couple of different moves, maybe rook c1, maybe queen b3, even queen d4. The queen is very active, preventing some e5. Some rook d1 is coming. It looks like a very pleasant position. We will eventually take here. This will be a weakness. This bishop is very weak, very passive. I think black is just worse. So that's why I think he needs to go with b6 in this position. So it's better to do it immediately to keep our options. Now knight bd7 is maybe a little bit more accurate, but of course bishop b7 or c5 are possible. If bishop b7, the difference is, of course, we can still go b4 or something, but now the difference is after rook c1, he cannot play c5. This is very bad because of c5. We already have seen this idea to block these pieces. And after knight d7, anyway, we go c5. And now black is simply not on time to play c5 himself. This is very bad. We just go e4 next, and it's very passive. And if he takes, this is similar. We just go here e4. It's very good position. And after knight b8, trying maybe to regroup the knight, but then b4 is coming, and white is just pressing. I mean, it's just very nice position. Obviously, black's position is kind of very passive. So that's why bishop b7 is not so great move order because of this c5 idea, and that's why it's better to start with the knight d7 move. If he goes c5 immediately, I think this is possible. It's not so bad. We can take, maybe rook c1 is, sorry, in this position, maybe rook c1 is possible as well, but we can even take. And now we have some options. We can take cd. This is also slightly better. e4, if a3, rook b8 is not so clear, then queen b6. I think it's better to push immediately. Take. If he takes with the pawn, it's probably a bit worse. We go here and just slightly better. Knight e4 is similar anyway. We just take here, queen e4, maybe knight d2 again, but queen e4, let's say, take. And these positions are always a bit better because of the pawns. But anyway, there are a lot of tendencies to be just some kind of drawish endgames. So it's slightly better, and it's not so obvious. I think black has some chances. But anyway, it's very pleasant for white, this is no doubt about it. So after this BC, I think this is another option to keep the game a little bit more complicated. Just play 3 and just to place the rooks, eventually the knight. It looks like very pleasant, these hanging pawns for white. This knight is, if it was on d7 it would be better, but here it's a bit passive. So definitely white chances are slightly better. After castle we're going to the main move, knight bd7, now we can go rook c1 and then c5. But now I think it's kind of interesting, it's not the only way, but it's very interesting to play like this. I think even, just I want to mention that even positions like this are also playable. White can play knight b1, very typical, and just plays the knight and eventually just play 3, rook e1. It's still a bit better for white. But in this particular case I already like to play with b4 with some ideas to block with c5. So for example, if he goes c5 himself, then this is kind of unpleasant because I think white's pieces are very active. For example, of course, this is met by queen e3 and we have this pin. So after take, we just take here. White is better. If he goes bishop b7 or dc4 first, let's say, we just take here. This is also kind of unpleasant. The pawn is hanging, some rook d1. It looks like our knight is also very active. Looks like unpleasant for black. And after queen e4, if he goes bishop b7, we just go here, here, and all our pieces are just very nicely placed. And I mean, it looks very, very simple for white. So this is about c5. If he goes a5, it's not a great idea because we take. This is always very good for white, just to block the square. To play rook c1 and knight e5 next. It looks very, very good for white. And if knight d5 is similar, it's just clearly better. He even very difficult, he will push c6 because of knight d6. And now the knight wants to jump to e5 and then c6. White is much better. So after b4, I think the most decent way is probably to play is to go bishop b7, c5, blocking. Here it must be said that white has some options. We can even go here, it's also very interesting. If ed, we can go b5, eventually queen b3. And if knight d5 still, it's a little bit better, just rook c1 next maybe. I mean, it looks very simple as well. So you can choose here to take cd5 or to play a little bit more complicated c5, trying to block this bishop here. And just trying to play this position, I think is a bit better. After bishop a6, we can go rook e1, eventually some e4. It looks very, very pleasant position, definitely. I mean, it's just one-sided. So this is about these rare moves. I think bishop d2 is very solid and actually playable for black, but it's very passive and compared to the other Catalans, it's simply a much worse version. So thank you for watching this lesson and see you guys in the next ones. Thank you.